There's a kind of person the military never talks about in press conferences. They don't get the medals pinned in public. The names don't trend. Nobody makes a movie where someone who looks like them saves the day. Not because it doesn't happen, but because when it does, the paperwork quietly buries it under 17 layers of classification and a stamp that reads sensitive personnel. The world keeps spinning. The story stays locked in a filing cabinet somewhere in a building most people don't know exists. This is one of those stories. And it starts not with a bang, but with silence. The specific kind of silence that falls over a radio channel when something has gone very, very wrong, and the people on the other end are no longer in a position to speak. Her name was Senior Chief Petty Officer Dana Walters, and she had not slept in 31 hours. That was not unusual. Sleep in her line of work was something that happened between missions the way rainfall happened between droughts. You were grateful for it, you didn't count on it, and you never, ever complained when it stopped. She had learned that lesson 11 years ago, in a place she still couldn't name in conversation, during a 3-day operation that had shaved something off the back of her that never quite grew back. She was 34 years old. She looked 42 and felt 60 on bad days, 25 on good ones. Today had not yet declared itself either way. The forward operating base sat low and ugly against the hillside like something the landscape was trying to swallow. Prefabricated walls, sandbag reinforcements along the northern perimeter, a satellite dish that had been repaired so many times with zip ties and electrical tape that the original manufacturer would not have recognized it. Dana had been stationed here for 6 weeks as part of support and intelligence coordination unit, the kind of title that sounded bureaucratic and meant something considerably more dangerous in practice. Her official role was tactical communications and intelligence relay. What that meant on the ground, in the actual live reality of her days, was that she sat inside a reinforced comm room the size of a generous closet and kept 3 separate operations running simultaneously in her head while managing radio channels, satellite feeds, and a rotating cast of operators who all needed things from her at the same time, and none of whom were particularly patient about it. She was, by every measure, the best at what she did. She was also, at this particular moment, the only person in the comm room. Martinez had gone to get food 40 minutes ago and had not come back, which was either a sign that the mess was backed up or a sign that Martinez had fallen asleep on a folding chair somewhere, which had happened twice before, and Dana had let it go both times because Martinez was 23 and still believed the body had limits. Dana had stopped believing the body had limits somewhere around year 7. The mission running on Channel 3 was a 4-man SEAL element, call sign Razor, operating in a valley approximately 14 kilometers northeast of the base. They had been inserted at 0200 for a reconnaissance and intelligence collection objective. A high-value target had been tracked to a compound in that valley, and Razor's job was to confirm the presence, document the layout, and extract without contact. No contact. That was the directive. Clean. Simple. 14 kilometers of hard terrain between them and home, and nothing was supposed to happen. At 0417, something happened. It started as a routine check-in. Razor's team leader, a man Dana knew only as Cortez, whose actual first name she had never been told and had stopped asking about, gave her a standard position update. Grid coordinates. Confirmation of target compound visual. No anomalies. Copy that, Razor. You're green on my end. Check back at 0500. Copy base. Razor out. She had returned to Channel 1, which was running a completely separate logistics relay that required half her attention and none of her concern. She monitored the satellite feed. She logged the check-in. She drank coffee that had been hot 2 hours ago and was now a temperature best described as technically liquid. At 0441, Channel 3 erupted. Not voices. Not a proper transmission. A burst of static, then something that might have been a word. It was hard to tell. The signal was degraded, and whatever was happening on the other end was eating into the transmission quality, and then the channel went to white noise. Dana set down her coffee. She pulled up Channel 3 and waited. 3 seconds. 5. 10. She keyed her mic. Razor, this is base. Confirm status. Silence. Razor, I need a status check. Cool. More silence. But not empty silence. The kind that breathes. Then, low and compressed, Cortez's voice came through. He was whispering, which meant he was very close to something he did not want to hear him, and the words were stripped down to the minimum necessary information, the way words only get when someone is counting the seconds they have left to spend on them. Base. Compromised. Taking fire. 4 tangos, minimum. We have a man down. Requesting immediate. The transmission cut. Dana was already moving. She hit the emergency alert for the base's quick reaction force. A burst signal that would wake the QRF commander and have bodies moving within 3 minutes if everything worked the way it was supposed to. She rerouted the satellite feed to lock on Razor's last known grid. She pulled up the terrain overlay for the valley and marked the compound, the insertion route, the 3 most likely egress paths, and the 2 most likely ambush positions based on the topography. She did all of this in the time it took most people to find the light switch in a dark room. The QRF commander, Captain Birch, came over the command channel 40 seconds later. What V we got? Razor is compromised. 4 or more hostiles. Confirmed contact. 1 casualty reported. Last known position is grid. She rattled off the coordinates from memory. And I've lost comms. They may have gone to radio silence, or the equipment is damaged. I'm working on re-establishing contact. I'm mobilizing now. ETA to that grid is 22 minutes by air. 22 minutes. She heard what he didn't say. 22 minutes was a long time to be pinned down with a man bleeding in a valley with 4 armed men closing distance. Copy that, Captain. I'll keep trying to reach them. She kept trying to reach them. The channel stayed dead. What she knew, mapped out against the terrain overlay in the cold light of the monitor. Razor had been moving along the eastern ridge of the valley when contact was established. The compound sat at the valley floor. If the team had been seen from the compound, the hostiles would be moving uphill toward the ridge, and Razor, 4 men, 1 of them down, would be retreating along the ridge line, which narrowed significantly about 600 meters north of their last position. A natural choke point. The kind of terrain that turned a retreat into a trap if you didn't move fast enough. She also knew something that she didn't put in the report to Captain Birch yet, because she was still processing it herself. The number of hostiles Cortez had reported, 4 minimum, did not match the intelligence profile for the compound. The profile had it as a transit location. 2, maybe 3 individuals maximum, lightly armed, low security posture. 4 was already above profile. Minimum meant Cortez had seen 4 and suspected more. This was not a lightly armed transit location. Something had changed. Either the intelligence was wrong to begin with, which happened more than anyone in an official briefing would ever admit, or the compound had received additional personnel in the window between when the intelligence was collected and when Razor stepped foot in that valley. Neither option was comforting. She pulled the original intelligence report, checked the timestamp, cross-referenced it against the satellite imagery log, found what she was looking for in 40 seconds, a gap in coverage 14 hours long, during which the satellite had been tasked to a different priority. 14 hours in which anything could have arrived at that compound, and the cameras would not have seen it. She documented this, flagged it, sent it to Birch with a 2-line note. Intelligence may be compromised. Compound may have additional occupants. Approach Razor extraction with elevated threat posture. Then, she went back to trying to raise the team on every available frequency. At 0458, she got something. Not Cortez. A different voice, rougher, younger, breath coming in tight, controlled pulls that meant the speaker was either running or actively working not to panic. Ramirez. She recognized Ramirez. He was the youngest of the 4, 26, had shown her a picture of his daughter once during a slow afternoon in the mess hall, a girl in a yellow dress with pigtails who had her father's eyes, and apparently her mother's ability to smile like the whole world was doing her a personal favor. Base, this is Ramirez. Cortez is down. I repeat, Cortez is down. We are at the ridge, the northern choke point, 6 tangos confirmed and closing. We have one more wounded. I'm the only one. He stopped. Dana heard it before the words came back. The specific quality of silence that meant someone was recalculating everything they thought they knew about their situation. I'm the only one who can shoot, Ramirez said. The channel held that sentence for a moment like a hell breath. Then, QRFETA? 18 minutes, Dana said. She didn't tell him what 18 minutes meant at that choke point with 6 hostiles and 1 shooter. He already knew. He had done the same math she had. Copy. A pause. Base, I need eyes. I need someone to tell me what's coming up that ridge. She was already pulling the satellite feed, already adjusting the angle, already pushing the image resolution to its limit. The valley came into sharp relief on her screen. The dark shapes of the ridge, the pale thread of the path running along its spine, and there, 6 moving shapes below the ridge line, spread in a loose, tactical formation, moving uphill with the deliberate patience of people who knew they had their target boxed. And there at the choke point, 3 shapes. 2 of them still. 1 moving. Ramirez. Moving between the 2 still ones, doing something with his hands. She couldn't tell from the resolution what exactly, but she could guess. She could always guess, and she was almost always right. He was keeping them alive. Both of them. Moving between them. Keeping pressure on whatever needed pressure kept. Checking airways. Doing the frantic and tender arithmetic of battlefield medicine with one hand while trying to hold a rifle with the other. 6 hostiles. 18 minutes. 1 shooter who was also the only medic for 2 critically wounded men. Dana looked at the screen for 3 full seconds. Then she stood up, crossed to the weapons locker on the far wall. The one that technically required 2-person authorization to open, but which she had the override code for because she had written the override protocol herself during a security audit 18 months ago. And she opened it. She pulled out the long case, set it on the table, clicked the latches. Inside, nested in foam, a bolt-action precision rifle. Her qualification scores with this platform were, depending on who you asked, either impressive or unsettling. Her instructor at the advanced marksmanship course had used the word unsettling, and she had chosen to take it as a compliment. She looked at the satellite feed, then at the rifle, then at the terrain overlay. She already knew the math. She had been running it since the moment she heard Ramirez say, "I'm the only one who can shoot." The ridge was 14 kilometers away, but the comm tower on the eastern edge of the base sat on a natural elevation that put it 60 meters above the valley floor. From that position, with the right ballistic data and a clean sight line, she was already doing the wind calculations in her head. Temperature, elevation, the humidity reading from the base weather sensor, which she checked every morning as a habit and had checked 40 minutes ago. She keyed the channel one more time. Ramirez, hold your position. Help is closer than you think. She slung the rifle, picked up her radio, and walked out the door into the dark. The Eastern Comm Tower had 41 rungs on its access ladder, and Dana had climbed every one of them in the dark with a rifle on her back in under 90 seconds. She knew it was 90 seconds because she had counted her own heartbeats, which was a habit she had developed a long time ago in a situation she did not think about if she could help it, and her heart was running at a controlled 62 beats per minute because she had made it do that, the same way she made her hand stay steady and her breathing stay low and her mind stay on the math and only the math. The platform at the top of the tower was 3 meters by 2 meters, ringed by a railing that was more psychological comfort than structural guarantee. She had been up here twice before, once during a routine inspection, once during a comms upgrade, and she knew the sight lines. She had noted them both times the way she noted everything useful, the way some people collect stamps or baseball cards, except the things she collected were more along the lines of angles, distances, and the particular way light moved across terrain at different hours. 0503, horizon still dark. The valley a black seam in the darker earth. She set up in the prone position against the north-facing railing, pulled the rifle from its sling, unfolded the bipod, settled the stock against her shoulder with the practice pressure of someone who had done this enough times that her body found the position without being told. She worked the bolt, chambered the first round. Then she pressed her eye to the scope. The night vision integration on this optic was, in her professional opinion, the one piece of equipment on this base that the procurement office had actually gotten right. The valley resolved through the glass in green-gray clarity, the ridge line, the choke point, the moving shapes. She found Ramirez first. He was crouched low, pressed against the ridge's eastern face, using the natural rock formation as cover. She could see the outline of the two men beside him, Cortez, who was not moving at all, and a man she believed was Park, who was moving slightly, which meant Park was still with them, which was something. She found the 6 hostiles next. They were moving in 2 groups of 3, a classic pincer formation meant to bracket the choke point for both sides and leave whoever was caught inside nowhere to go. Whoever was leading this assault knew what they were doing. They were moving with discipline, maintaining spacing, not rushing. They had the numbers, and they knew it, and they were not making the mistake of getting sloppy about it. The left group was closer, 200 meters below the choke point, working up through a section of loose shale that would slow them. The right group was higher, already approaching the choke point from the opposite side, which was the more immediate problem. She had Ramirez's voice in her earpiece, low and tight. Base, they're going to reach the high side of the choke point in about 4 minutes. I've got 1 angle and 2 rounds of usable ammunition before I have to reload, and I can't reload without dropping pressure on Cortez as he stopped. I can't reload. For minutes. QRF was still 14 minutes out. She did not announce herself. She did not ask for permission. There was a version of this where she called Captain Birch and walked through the request and waited for authorization, and the right group of 3 reached the choke point in the time that conversation took, and the rest of it became a very different story. She had learned, over 11 years, to recognize the exact moment when the chain of command became a luxury nobody could afford. This was that moment. She found the lead figure in the right group. Man moving uphill at a steady pace, rifle at a low ready, head turning in the practice scan of someone with training. She tracked him for 3 seconds to confirm direction and pace. Calculated the angle. Adjusted for elevation. She was shooting down into a valley, which meant the bullet would travel a flatter arc than the optical sightline suggested, which meant she needed to adjust her aim point lower than instinct said. She made the adjustment, settled her breathing, exhaled half, held. The first shot broke the silence like a door being kicked off its hinges. Through the scope, she watched the lead figure drop. Not a fall, a drop. The kind that is instantaneous and total and leaves no ambiguity. The 2 figures behind him scattered, which was the correct instinct, but they scattered toward each other instead of away from each other, which told her they had not identified the direction of fire. She worked the bolt. Smooth. Clean. The way she had run this motion 10,000 times in practice and 22 times in situations that were not practice. Found the second figure. Same calculation. Adjusted for his new position. He had gone prone behind a rock formation, which was good thinking from his perspective and insufficient from hers because the rock was not wide enough to cover his entire profile, and she could see 9 inches of him, and 9 inches was enough. Second shot. The figure stopped moving. 1 left in the right group. He had correctly identified her general direction now. She could see him oriented toward the base, toward the tower, but correctly identifying direction and correctly identifying a precise elevated position on a dark tower at 400 meters were 2 different skills, and he had the first one and not the second. He fired in her general direction. The rounds went wide and low, thudding into sandbags at the base of the tower somewhere below her. She found him in the scope. Third shot. The right group was gone. 14 seconds. She swung left. Found the left group. They had heard the shots and had stopped their uphill movement and were trying to assess. 2 of the 3 had gone to cover. The third was still standing, which in her experience meant either extraordinary courage or that the information about what was happening had not fully arrived in his brain yet. She took him first because a standing man was a faster shot and she needed to build time. Fourth shot. The other 2 were moving now, not uphill, sideways, along the valley floor, which meant they had made the calculation that the objective was no longer viable and the correct move was retreat. She could respect that calculation, and she could also not let them complete it, because retreating meant regrouping, and regrouping meant Razor was not safe in 18 minutes or 48 minutes or any minutes. She found the faster of the two. Fifth shot. The last figure was running hard, down the valley, moving away from the ridge, and she tracked him in the scope, and her finger was on the trigger, and she stayed there for 2 full seconds. He was running away. She took her finger off the trigger. She watched him go. Later, people would ask her about that decision. She had a short answer that she gave in official contexts. She had a longer, truer answer that she had never given anyone and suspected she never would. The short answer was tactical, a running target at that distance in low light, no guarantee of clean shot, QRF inbound, and capable of handling one fleeing individual. The long answer was something else, something that lived in the space between what a person is trained to do and what they can live with, and she had drawn that line in a particular place, and she was not going to debate it. She keyed her radio. Ramirez, you have one hostile in retreat, heading south down the valley floor. 5 are down. Your approach is clear on both sides. A pause that lasted long enough to make her chest tight. Copy that, base. Ramirez's voice had a quality she recognized and could not name. Not relief. It was too complicated for relief. Copy. Thank you. She did not respond. There was nothing to say to thank you in that context that did not feel small. She started breaking down the rifle. The QRF arrived 11 minutes later. She had descended the tower and was back in the comm room, radio on, satellite locked, tracking the helicopter's movement across the valley. By the time Captain Birch's voice came over the channel to report that they had reached Razor's position. Cortez was critical, which meant alive, but barely. Park had a through on his left arm, which was bleeding significantly but was survivable. Ramirez was... Birch paused before this one, which told Dana something before the words did. Ramirez was uninjured, which in operational language meant physically uninjured, because the other kind of injury was not something that showed up in a field assessment. She logged everything. Comm log, incident timeline, shot record, satellite data, the 14-hour intelligence gap. She wrote it all down in the flat, bureaucratic language of official reporting, which was a language she had mastered and which she used precisely because it contained everything and expressed nothing. She made a cup of coffee, drank it hot this time because she had been back in the comm room for 20 minutes before Martinez finally appeared, blinking and apologetic, with a plate of food she no longer wanted. You missed the whole thing, she said. Martinez looked at the comm logs, then at her, then at the weapon case sitting closed on the table. Holy, eat your food, she said. I need you on channel 1. Martinez ate. She went back to work. Outside, the horizon had gone the pale gray of early morning, the kind that comes before color, before warmth, before the day decides what kind of day it's going to be. She watched it through the small window above the monitors for exactly 4 seconds. That was as long as she allowed herself. For seconds to look at the light and remind herself that it was still there, that the light came back, that this was a fact regardless of what else was or was not a fact on any given morning. Then, she turned back to the screens. What nobody in that comm room knew yet, what the incident report did not capture, and the official debrief would only partially address, was that the story was not over. The single fleeing hostile she had chosen not to shoot was not simply a man running away. He was, as Dana had suspected from the moment she saw the compound's personnel levels, the key to understanding what had changed in that 14-hour intelligence gap. Who had arrived? Who had sent them? Why a transit location had become something that looked considerably more like an ambush waiting to be sprung. The answer to that question was not in any of the databases she had access to. She had already sent the query to someone who had access to the ones she didn't. She was waiting. The morning light kept growing, pale gray to pale gold. The valley below the base sat quiet now, empty except for what she knew was in it and what the QRF birds were bringing back across it. She thought about Ramirez's daughter in the yellow dress, the pigtails, the smile that was her mother's. She pulled up a blank form and began writing the commendation recommendation for Ramirez. He had held 2 critically wounded men alive in a choke point with one hand and held a rifle with the other, and had not broken and had not run and had not made a single decision that she could fault. He deserved paper that said so. She wrote it carefully. She used better words than the form asked for. She took her time. She was 3/4 through it when the encrypted channel opened with a soft double beep that meant a priority incoming from the intelligence liaison she had reached out to 40 minutes ago. She set the commendation aside, pulled up the incoming. Read it once. Read it again. Set it face down on the table in the reflexive gesture of someone who needed a moment between what they had just learned and what they were going to have to do about it. The fleeing hostile was not a soldier, not a local recruit, not a low-level operative running because his unit had just been eliminated. He was a courier, and he was carrying something that, if he reached the people waiting for him 20 kilometers east, would set in motion a sequence of events that would make the last hour look like a disagreement between neighbors. Dana picked up the form again. Her hand did not shake. It never shook, but she pressed harder on the pen than she meant to, and when she looked down at the page the commendation she had been writing so carefully for Ramirez was underlined, without her meaning to underline it, by a single deep groove in the paper that ran the full width of the line. She looked at it for a moment, set the pen down, picked up the radio. "Captain Birch," she said, "I need 5 minutes of your time when you're back on ground. There's a second problem." Captain Birch gave her 7 minutes. He came straight off the helicopter and into the comm room, still wearing his flight helmet under one arm, and the particular expression of a man who had been awake long enough that his face had stopped pretending. He sat down across from her, set the helmet on the table, and looked at her the way people look at something when they already know it is going to cost them something they have not budgeted for. She showed him the intelligence brief. She laid out the analysis. She walked him through the 14-hour gap, the compound's elevated personnel count, the tactical formation of the 6 hostiles. Not improvised, not a scrambled response, but a prepared ambush that had been waiting for Razor to walk into it. And then she showed him what her contact had pulled on the fleeing courier. His name, for operational purposes, was translated roughly as the letter. He had been moving material for the same network for 3 years. He had never been caught because he never stayed in one place long enough to be documented, and he never traveled the same route twice, and he had in the 3 years his dossier spanned, delivered things that had resulted in 4 separate incidents in 4 separate countries, none of which appeared connected on the surface, and all of which pointed, when you pulled the thread far enough back, to the same source. He was not supposed to be at that compound. His presence there meant one of 2 things. Either the network had elevated the compound status, and it was now something considerably more significant than a transit point, or something was being moved through it that was important enough to require his specific services. The intelligence brief from Dana's contact said the second option was more likely. It also said that whatever was being moved was time-sensitive in the way that things are only time-sensitive when they are connected to a specific window, a specific date, a specific event, and the window was closing. "How long?" Birch asked. "Best estimate, 72 hours. Possibly less if he made the courier exchange last night before Razor stumbled onto the compound." Birch was quiet for a moment. He was not a man who processed out loud, which Dana had always found professionally compatible with her own tendencies. "One man," he said, "running south, 20 kilometers to the exchange point. On foot in that terrain, 6 hours minimum. By vehicle, 90 minutes, but vehicles are trackable, and he knows that. He goes on foot, so he's still moving. He's still moving." Another pause. The kind that happens when 2 people have reached the same conclusion and are taking a moment before committing to what it means. "I can't authorize another ground element," Birch said. "Not before Cortez and Park are evacuated and accounted for. I've got 1 operational team, and 2 of them are on a medevac right now." "I know," which means the QRF goes in the air and intercepts, or he stopped. She waited. "Or we request support from higher, and it goes through the approval chain, and it takes 4 hours we don't have." "Yes," she said. Birch looked at the intelligence brief again, then at her. He was not looking at her the way men sometimes looked at her, the measuring, doubting kind of look that she had learned to receive without expression somewhere around year 3. He was looking at her the way people look at things they have decided to trust. "What do you need?" he said. What she needed was a spotter, a confirmed grid on the courier's movement, and air assets to cut off the southern route to the exchange point. What she had was a working satellite feed, a radio, and the rifle she had already used that morning and had cleaned and reconfigured while Birch was still in the air. She did not explain the gap between what she needed and what she had. She had spent her career operating in that gap. She was, in many ways, the product of it. "Air assets on the southern route," she said. "Block his exit. Keep him in the valley. I'll coordinate from the tower and relay to the pilot in real time." Birch called the air element. She went back to the tower. The sun was fully up now. The valley was no longer green-gray through the scope, but pale gold and brown, the color of burnt grass and old stone, the color of every difficult place she had ever been. She settled back into the prone position against the railing and pressed her eye to the optic and found the valley floor and began to move through it systematically, section by section, the way she had been taught to search ground. Not looking for movement, looking for the absence of what should be there, the disruption of pattern, the thing that does not belong to the texture of the landscape. She found him 40 minutes later. He was not moving south. He had changed direction, east, cutting across the valley toward a dry watercourse that would give him a covered route and obscure his movement from aerial observation, which meant he knew about aerial observation, which meant he was better trained than his profile had suggested or he had been warned. The second option was worse. She relayed his grid to the air element and to Birch, tracked him through the watercourse, where he disappeared into the shadows for stretches and reappeared at the bends. He was moving with focused, efficient speed, not running, which drew attention and exhausted you and made your hands unsteady, but walking fast in the deliberate ground-covering way of someone who had learned to travel in hostile terrain without looking like they were traveling in hostile terrain. She tracked him for 2 hours. In that 2 hours, she thought about a number of things that she would not have admitted to thinking about in any official context. She thought about Cortez, who was in surgery in a hospital she could not name in a country she was not supposed to be in, and whether the surgery was going well, and what Cortez had said to her once during a long and boring briefing about how his daughter was studying marine biology, and he was proud of her in the specific way that people are proud when their child has become something they themselves could not have imagined becoming. She thought about Ramirez and the girl in the yellow dress. She thought about the 11 years and the things they had cost and what they had given back and whether the accounting balanced, and she came to the same conclusion she always came to, which was not yes and not no, but something harder and more specific that did not have a word in any language she knew. She thought about the 7 men she had killed that morning. She did this not in the spirit of self-recrimination and not in the spirit of satisfaction. She did it the way you check a wound, clinically, honestly, without flinching, but without pretending it is nothing. She had killed them because the math required it. She would do it again under the same conditions. These facts coexisted peacefully in her mind because she had made peace with them the only way it was actually possible to make peace with things like this, which was to look at them directly and refuse to make them smaller or larger than they were. At the 2-hour mark, the courier made a mistake. It was a small one. He emerged from the watercourse at a point where the eastern valley wall curved inward, which forced him into a 50-meter stretch of open ground to reach the next covered route. He paused at the edge of the watercourse. She could see him through the scope, standing at the mouth of it, looking left and right, calculating, and then he moved quickly across the open ground. She tracked him. The air element was not in position yet. Still 4 minutes out. She had his grid, she had the trajectory of his movement, and she had a clear sight line. She also had a choice. The shot was possible. Difficult. The range had extended as he moved, and she was working at the upper edge of the platform's effective distance, and he was moving, but possible. Her mourning had already demonstrated possible in circumstances that were arguably less favorable. She held. She was not going to shoot a man in the back while he ran across open ground if there was another option available. This was a line she had drawn. The lines she drew for herself were often not the lines officially drawn for her, and they were not always lines other people understood, but they were hers and they were not negotiable. For minutes, the air element came in from the south, low and fast, cutting across the mouth of the valley in a pass that made the courier stop moving entirely. She watched him stop, stand completely still for 3 seconds. Look up, look south at the bird, look around him at the valley walls. He understood. She could see it in the stillness of him. He sat down, slowly, with the specific deliberateness of a man who was putting his weapon down and did not want to die today. He put his hands out to his sides, and he sat down in the pale gold dirt of the valley floor, and he waited. She kept the scope on him, kept him in the glass until the ground team that Birch had scrambled in the last 30 minutes came up the valley floor and reached him, and the two shapes that were her team members and the smaller shape between them. That was him, hands bound now, standing, became one cluster moving back toward the base. She exhaled, not relief, something quieter. The particular absence of tension that comes when something is finished, not resolved, not clean, not wrapped up the way things are wrapped up in stories, but finished in the operational sense. No more moving parts, no more split-second math. The machine could stop running at full speed and drop back to idle, and her body recognized this and responded by letting something go from her shoulders that she had not been fully aware she was holding. She broke down the rifle, climbed back down the ladder, walked back to the comm room. Martinez was still on Channel 1. Martinez looked at her and opened his mouth, and she shook her head and he closed it again. He was learning. It had taken 3 separate instances of her shaking her head before he had learned, which was faster than most. She wrote the full incident report. All of it. Every decision, every shot, every timestamp, every piece of intelligence, and the gap in it that had created the conditions for the ambush in the first place. She wrote it in the flat official language, and she wrote it completely, and she signed it and sent it up the chain to the people who would read it and flag it and route it to whatever process came next. Then she wrote the second commendation form. Not for Ramirez this time. For Cortez, who had been the one to get on the radio when the ambush began and give her the information she needed, who had been the one to call it in instead of going dark, who had made the decision to trust the channel in a moment when he had every reason to believe help was too far away to matter. She wrote it carefully. She used the right words. She meant all of them. At 1,400 hours, she received confirmation that Cortez had come through surgery. Stable. Critical, but stable, which in medical language meant he was going to survive the surgery, and in every other language meant the question of what came next was still open. Park was awake and complaining about the hospital food, which was the most positive possible medical update. Ramirez had been debriefed and released to quarters. She was told he had not slept. She understood that completely. At 14:15, Captain Birch appeared in the doorway of the comm room. He looked at her for a moment. "The courier is talking," he said. She waited. What he was carrying, Birch stopped, chose his next words with the care of someone who was editing in real time. What he was carrying would have been very bad, is what people are saying. I assume. They're saying 6 months minimum of damage. Maybe more. He paused again. We stopped it. She registered this. Logged it internally in the same place. She kept the other things, the tallies, the accounting, the ongoing question of whether what was spent was worth what was prevented. Good, she said. It was the only word that fit. Not small. She did not mean it small. She meant it in the full weight of its 2 letters, the entirety of what good could carry when it was doing real work. Good as in the opposite of the alternative. Good as in the lives that would not now be interrupted in violent and permanent ways. Good as in Ramirez's daughter in the yellow dress getting to keep her father, which was not something that had been guaranteed 6 hours ago. Good. Birch nodded once. He understood the word the way she meant it. He had been doing this long enough to understand it. He left. She turned back to the monitors. Outside, the valley sat quiet under the afternoon light, which was harder and flatter than the morning gold, The kind of light that does not flatter anything but does illuminate it, shows it exactly as it is without apology. She could see the watercourse from the comm room window if she craned slightly, the dry brown cut of it through the valley floor, the stretch of open ground where the courier had stopped walking and sat down. She looked at it for 4 seconds. Then she turned away. The channels needed monitoring. The logs needed updating. Martinez needed guidance on a discrepancy in the Channel 1 relay timing that she had noticed 40 minutes ago and had not yet had the bandwidth to address. There was work that needed doing, which was the constant and reliable truth of her days, the fact that never changed regardless of what else happened, and she had always found something close to comfort in that constancy. The work continuing, the work being there, the work being something that did not ask you how you felt about it, just whether you were capable of doing it. She was capable. She sat back down at the console, pulled up the Channel 1 log, found the discrepancy, began to work. 3 days later, a commendation arrived for her, routed through channels that moved considerably faster than the standard process, and signed by someone whose name carried enough institutional weight that Martinez went slightly pale when he saw it. She read it once, folded it, put it in the small metal box she kept under her bunk where she kept the other papers like it, which were not numerous but were not absent either, 11 years having provided certain occasions. The box was not something she looked at often, but it was something she kept. She had never been able to fully articulate why, even to herself. The closest she had come was something she had said once to someone she trusted, in a context she no longer remembered, that the papers were not proof of anything she needed proved about herself. They were proof of something harder and more specific. Proof that it happened, that it was real. Then the gap between what was supposed to occur and what actually occurred, there had been a person who saw what needed doing and did it, and the world in its ordinary and relentless turning had been slightly different for it. Slightly. That was the word. Not dramatically. Not the way stories made it sound when the stories were being told for an audience. Slightly different. The difference between what happened and what would have happened. A space so thin that most people would never know to look for it, would never see it if they did, would spend their lives walking through a door whose frame had been quietly held up by something they could not name and never asked about. She was okay with that. She had always been okay with that. She pulled up a new comm log, opened the channel, put on the headset, went back to work.